I used to go on Omegle frequently as a child from like 9-12-ish, at least 15 years ago, with friends and alone, and obviously saw a lot of dicks. That was pretty much the reason I went on, cause I was a curious kid, but I would also talk to all kinds of people on there. One day, I'm on there while my parents aren't home, and this dude with a creepy-ass mask comes on. He starts talking to me, then all of a sudden asks, "Do you live near? Insert where I lived here." Stupidly, I was thinking maybe I knew this person or whatever, but I was like 11 or 12 and was dumb, and I said yes. Then the guy says, "Never trust a man in a mask, kid." I slammed the laptop shut so quick and was immediately terrified for my life. I told my sister, and she just got mad at me, thinking a man was coming to get us. I kept this a secret from my parents for so long, but I was so terrified a man was going to show up and kidnap me that I was looking over my shoulder all the time, especially in my driveway at night. I eventually told my mom, and she reassured me, saying he probably can't see exactly where we were, just the general area. This has stuck with me my whole life, but as an adult, I'm just thinking, maybe this guy was literally just trying to scare kids off Omegle, where they have no business being in the first place. He obviously never came to get me, unless he's playing the long game, and I'm sure he scared many kids off that site at the time. Thanks for your work, scary Omegle man. Hopefully that's what your actual goal was. When I was a teenager, I think it was middle school to early high school, I used to wait until my grandma would go upstairs and I would sneak down and listen to music and make scrambled eggs, LOL. It became a ritual for me, especially in the summertime, where I would eat my eggs and listen to my music on my laptop and just stay up late enjoying the whole downstairs to myself. One particular night in the summer, I wanted to sit on my front porch and listen to music, talk with friends on Facebook, and enjoy the nice weather. So I turned on my porch light and set up outside for a bit. Everyone in my house was asleep. It was probably pretty late, around 1, 2, or 3 a.m. I live on a main road in a suburban area. At night it gets very quiet and there are not many cars passing by. I saw a car slowly coming up to my driveway. At that point I started to get a little freaked out. Of all the houses on my street, why is he pulling into where I'm sitting? A man in his late 20s maybe quickly stepped out of the vehicle and began charging at me full speed on my front porch. I don't even think he closed his door. I immediately grabbed my laptop, threw it inside my house, shut my screen door, locked it, and peeked through the steel door and screamed, "Who are you? What do you want?" I remember him stopping halfway on my lawn in front of my door and saying, "Relax, I'm just the paper boy." And I yelled back, "Then why are you charging at me like that?" And him just turning and walking away. He had nothing in his hands. My door was open, the porch light was on, and you could clearly see me from the street. I even broke my laptop by chucking it inside my house so quickly. I was so spooked I watched him pull away from my living room window and made sure all the doors were locked and immediately told my mom what had happened. I had this idea in my head that he was trying to break into the house. I was too young and in shock to think about calling the police and reporting it. I'm not sure why my mom didn't either. I told the story years later to my friends, and they suggested he was possibly trying to abduct me. I immediately got chills when they said that to me, because that wasn't even a thought that occurred to me, surprisingly. Sometimes, like today, I'll remember the story and get curious if he ever did that again to another kid, or was ever caught for attempted kidnappings or potential break-ins, and I'll deep dive into looking for cases. I have never found anything from around that time. I'm 28 now, and that was probably the closest I've been to being kidnapped. I don't believe he had good intentions, and I don't believe he was really a paper boy. This happened about a year ago. I was living in a semi-shitty neighborhood, meaning that if you are a woman alone, you will get catcalled and bothered in the streets, maybe followed by insistent jerks if you are unlucky, but it was also mostly families, no hard drug consumption. So the buildings were always safe, and there were always people to help. I lived with 3 roommates, all of us women in our 20s and students. On my floor, there was only one other apartment, in which an elderly couple lived. Super nice and really involved in the building's life. They have been living in the apartment for 40 years. The husband had trouble walking/moving. One night, I am woken up by super loud screams and banging on our door. I get out of bed to go see, and 2 of my roommates, the last one, slept through it. To this day, I do not understand how she did it. Do as well. We are in front of the door, and we realize that the guy is actually banging on our neighbor's door so loud that we heard it. We did not want to turn the light on for fear that he would see it under our door and try to get in our apartment. We are in the dark, talking as quietly as possible so he will not hear us, and so we can listen to what he says. We look through the peephole, and the guy has something in his hand, but we can't see if it is a weapon. I do not live in the US, so no gun, but maybe a knife? The guy is screaming for my neighbors to come open the door. He is calling them by name, saying that he is going to get in and that if they do not open the door, he won't be kind to them. I call the police, and the operator asks if there are ways for them to get in the building. We have no way of opening the gates remotely, so I tell her no, and that they will have to find a way to get in because the guy is clearly trying to harm my neighbors. She says, "Why call if we can't get in?" and hangs up on me. My roommate then calls the police again, and fortunately, it is another operator that picks up and sends a patrol. By that time, the guy has stopped screaming but is still in the hallway, and we can hear a weird noise coming from our neighbor's door. He leaves the building by the elevator, and we are debating whether or not one of us should get out of the apartment, try to get to the first floor, not by the elevator, to open the door for the police. But we don't know if he is still in the building, so we stay inside. After like 10 minutes, we get out of the apartment to see if our neighbors are okay, and we see that the guy has carved a giant X on the door, so definitely with a knife or something sharp enough. The police get here, do not even get out of their car, they just take a circle around the building 2 times and leave. We never heard back from them. You can understand how livid we were. We later learned that my neighbors were on vacation for the week, so the apartment was empty, and they escaped a probable heart attack from the sheer madness that was this night. I got the wife on the phone, and she was like, "No need to tell my husband. It is probably a deranged old tenant. It won't happen again." And I was like, "Ma'am, there is a giant X carved on your door. He is going to find out that a psycho tried to hurt you." A week later, I come back from work and see 2 policemen in the elevator. Apparently, some teenagers found it amusing to block the elevator on the 10th floor, so they came to give them a fine or something. I tell them the story, and they tell me, "Next time you should call the police." And I was like, "Oh shit, Sherlock, I would never have guessed that on my own." So anyway, I moved out of this building a few months after. We never had something that extreme happen again, but we got 2 more weird things happen to us. One teenager, like 17, bangs on our door to ask for painkillers for his grandmother, and like strong stuff like the equivalent of tramadol, so obviously we did not open the door. One guy tried to give us food. He was weirdly insistent about it, even though we refused like 4 times and came back to the apartment twice. The last time he just left the bag of food by our door. We did not take any risk and threw everything out for fear that he had done something to it. Once again, we are 4 young women. So yeah, enjoy. It had been some time already that I wanted to rant about the cops and how utterly useless they were to 4 terrified young women. This just happened last night. and I'm still trying to process it. Me, 32, and my boyfriend, 34, just moved into an apartment together. We spent months looking for a place that would be spacious enough for the both of us and in a nice area. One of the apartment complexes we found had good reviews overall and is its own community of sorts. Lots of kids and super pet friendly with playgrounds, dog parks, a pool, etc. We toured the place and concluded it seemed to be in a relatively safe area, or so we thought. My boyfriend and I went to bed around 11 o'clock last night. He fell asleep pretty quickly, but I had a lot on my mind, so I stayed up on my phone for a while. Around midnight, I got up to go to the bathroom. When I came back to the bedroom, I noticed my cat, who was previously in his hammock that's attached to the windowsill, was now hiding under the bed. I tried not to think anything of it, but it did raise a bit of concern since he usually doesn't move from his kitty hammock all night. As I was getting back into bed, I heard a male voice yelling, succeeded by pounding on the door to what sounded like the unit directly below me. I couldn't make out what he was saying, other than "let me in" and something about him needing shoes. He proceeded to pound on the door for several minutes and then got quiet. I figured he gave up and left. Nope. He had circled around back, and I now heard him directly below my bedroom window. The unit below me is exactly the same layout, so he was at my neighbor's bedroom window. I could hear him messing with the screen, eventually removing it so he could try to pry the window open. I heard him scream in frustration as he tried to lift the window to climb through. Luckily, the locks on the windows here are pretty strong, so he was unsuccessful. He then gave up and proceeded to climb over my neighbor's banister that leads to a little porch and began banging on the glass door that led inside. He was pounding so violently that I could hear the blinds on the other side of the door being rattled. I peered out a slit in my bedroom blinds to see if I could get a good look at him. At first, I couldn't see anything since he was directly under my line of sight. After about a minute, I saw a white wooden chair go flying into the lawn. The man leapt back over the banister and proceeded to pick up the chair and smash it into pieces in the grass. It was too dark to see all the details, but I could see he had dark hair, was wearing a white t-shirt, and was indeed barefoot. It was around 1 a.m., which means this was going on for about an hour. My boyfriend had woken up and was groggily trying to make sense of what was happening. When he heard the man yelling under our window, he sat straight up and we looked at each other. I suggested we call the cops because we didn't know this man's intentions, and at this point he was being destructive. While this was going on, some of my neighbors had come out and approached the man, telling him he needed to leave the property. This happened several times. Someone would talk to him and he would walk away somewhere, only to come back a few minutes later and continue to bang on the windows and doors. We called the police and they got there around 1:50 a.m. The man must have seen the cop cars pull up because by the time they were scoping the premises, the man was nowhere to be found. They did see pieces of the broken chair scattered in the lawn, and they also tried knocking on my neighbor's door, but no one answered. After about 10 minutes, the cops left. They must have scared the man off because I sat up and waited for a while to see if he would come back, but didn't hear anything. At that point, I was exhausted and decided it was safe enough to go to sleep, so I began to drift off, having nightmares about him breaking into my apartment. I don't know how much time passed after that, but what I do know is that I was reawakened to a loud banging, but this time it sounded like it was on our front door. I sat up and listened. The man was demanding to be let in and that he still needed shoes. I debated on whether to call the police again since the man took off when he saw them. After several minutes of standing at my door, he gave up and went back downstairs and began banging on my neighbor's doors and windows. I figured he must have been getting tired because the banging and the yelling began to subside, with enough space in between to where I was in and out of sleep, but definitely keeping one eye open. The next time I woke up, the sun was just starting to come through the blinds. I checked my phone and it said 6:15 a.m. I turned over to see my boyfriend, already sitting up in bed, looking exhausted. He said the man was still there, banging on doors and demanding to be let in. Sure enough, as soon as my boyfriend said that, I heard the man yell and bang. This man had been going at it for just over 6 hours. Eventually, the neighborhood started waking up and the influx of people leaving for work, walking their dogs, etc. probably scared him off because we didn't hear anything after 6:45 or so. As I was making the bed, I could hear people talking outside again. This time, there was a woman crying and a man picking up the pieces of the chair in the lawn, jokingly saying it would make good lumber. I emailed the property management about this, asking if they could at least make a bulletin and make residents aware. M was empty aside from a single piece of paper left on the floor, and the air was suffocatingly full of dust, even more so than the tunnel that led us there. The piece of paper turned out to be a pay advice slip from 1984 in near perfect condition. Me and Em agreed this was pretty cool, and we started recording a video and making our way back out, actively paying attention to the litter we had breezed past before. This is where things got a bit odd and slightly disgusting. Using a pair of gloves, I began sifting through the empty packaging and checking expiry dates. Everything was dated 2011 or 2012, 10 years before we were there. As I searched more, I found a shopping bag that had two things in it. There was a singular penny from 2010 and a small piece of card torn off an ibuprofen box. On the back of this card were the words, L, River Cries plus the scene ends. I still to this day don't have an answer for this other than it's just a bit weird. As we moved further through the tunnel, we found the first of many disgusting things that were down here. In a corner, there was a pile of crumpled paper that turned out to be full of decade-old poo. Close to this, there was a book of train times, fitting for inside a railway bridge, from 2012, and it seems like the pages from that were used to, I guess, wipe. There were also multiple bottles that were full of a black liquid that we assumed was urine. We didn't find much else aside from that, and decided to head out of the tunnel and back into the small corridor. It was here where we debated going down the second tunnel. Initially we were going to, but once I peered in, I was immediately hit with an overwhelming sense of dread. Realizing it was getting dark out, and the both of us being already creeped out, we decided to head home and come back another day. For days had passed, and we decided to return. This time we were better prepared with flashlights and someone on the outside that knew where we were, and to call police if they didn't hear from either me or M after a specific time for PMIRC. We climbed down into the corridor, and this time we made our way to the closest hole. The rusty metal brackets either side of the hole combined with the metal grate roughly the same size indicated that this side was once blocked off. Ignoring this and the same feeling of dread we got last time we squeezed through the hole and into the tunnel. Immediately it was different. We couldn't see any rubbish like the last tunnel. The first thing we saw was the plastic piping that ran along the wall. In the previous tunnel this was intact, seemed to hold wiring for lights. However, in this tunnel it had been ripped off the walls. The wires were exposed, looking like they'd been crudely broken apart rather than cut. There was graffiti on the walls, most of it being symbols laid out almost like a code. There were triangles, squares, stars, and plus signs, plus symbol. This was a huge contrast to the previous tunnel. Everything seemed sinister almost. We made our way through the tunnel, noticing more and more of the piping pulled off, and even burn marks in some places. Eventually, we reached the end of the tunnel and were met with the same square hole as last time. Em went in first and I followed. Neither of us had seen inside the room yet. Once we were both in there, the atmosphere was hellish. I don't know how to describe it, but it felt like I was inside someone's nightmare, like we had just walked into a physical representation of suffering and death. And then we saw it. As we turned our torches into the room, we were met with a truly disturbing sight. The first thing we saw was a blue fold-out chair placed directly in the middle facing the wall to our right. As I walked further into the room, it got worse. Next to the chair was a length of rope splayed out on the floor. Reluctantly, I looked around more. I found a bundle of tape near one of the corners that had clearly been used. Near that tape lay a knife, approximately 3.5 inches in length with a brown handle. As soon as I saw this, my blood ran cold. I looked more and found more. There were what I can only describe as pages from erotic magazines on the floor with what looked like electrical tape on the corners. As I looked closer, I noticed that the eyes of all the women had been scraped out, not a clean cutout, like someone dragged the tip of a knife over it until it tore the paper. Realizing we were in a place that most likely wasn't meant to be found, I decided to use the chair to block off the entrance hole. That way, if anyone was coming in, we would know. After moving the chair, I kept looking around. There were patches of melted wax on the walls that I assume were where candles were placed to light up this awful scene. As I scanned the walls, I saw something. Attached to the plastic pipe on the wall opposite the chair were pieces of tape, the same tape that was bundled up on the floor. These pieces were about an arm's width apart and looked as if they were used to hold something or someone there. Most of the tape was cut off, and I can only assume that was the tape I'd found earlier. There were a few items in here as well: a red blanket, shoe brush, what looked like a candle in a tin, and a pair of scissors. After finding all this, I started recording on my phone again, showing some of what was there. Midway through one of the videos, we heard a noise. I was using Snapchat at the time, and I immediately stopped recording and started again because of the 1-minute limit. It was then Em saw something through the gap in the chair. Without thinking, I picked up the knife that was on the floor and ran over to Em. Looking through the gaps in the chair, we saw what looked like a head peering in from the tunnel entrance. We were trapped. No phone signal, no way out, deep in a concrete tunnel. I turned my phone to face through the gap to try and at least get it on video. As the torch from my phone was pointed down the tunnel, the figure ducked out of view. After a few minutes passed, I shouted down the tunnel asking if it was the police. There was silence. We sat in that cursed room for about an hour, staring through the metal frame of the chair, searching for movement. Each minute that passed made reality more apparent. We were brutally aware we could die in here. This was further solidified when I took a closer look at the knife. I wanted to know if it could hold up in a fight, and I learned it could. Where the plastic handle met the blade, there was residue. A mix of browns and pinks surrounded the base of the blade. I thought it was rust, but the colors were too light, and the blade was stamped with stainless steel. Having spent time around some very bad people a few years prior, I knew what I was looking at. After I showed Em the mix of dried blood and fleshy tissue that lined the base of the blade and sat in its slight serrations, we started to leave immediately. At this point, we didn't know if we would make it out. All we knew was if we stayed, we were definitely done. The person could come down here, a passing train could report the open hatch, and we would be locked in, or both. Em pulled the chair from the hole, and I started to climb through. My heart was beating out of my chest. The dust was more suffocating than it ever had been. Once I was through, Em followed. I led us cautiously through the tunnel, clutching the knife in my right hand, knowing it could be the deciding factor in our survival, and torch in my left. I checked every corner, every dip in the tunnel's architecture, praying there was nothing but ready if there was. After what felt like hours, we finally stumbled back to the tunnel entrance. We stood there, paralyzed, staring through that same small hole where just mere hours ago we had seen a face staring back at us. I carefully poked my head out, scanning the pitch-black surroundings. Nothing. No one. I scrambled out first, making sure to keep my right arm completely free, ready to swing if something came out of the dark. Then, I reached back in and hauled him out into the open. The second his feet hit the dirt, I took that wretched knife and hurled it as far down the tunnel as my arms could manage. I just wanted it gone. We sprinted toward the ladder. But looking up, my heart completely dropped. An awful sight met us. The heavy steel hatch, the one we left wide open, had been shut. We were trapped. Panic hit us like a brick wall. M fumbled for his phone, ready to dial emergency services right then and there. We knew someone else had been down here with us. What we didn't know was if they were still down here, watching us from the shadows. After a brief, breathless argument, we agreed to hold off on the call until we were absolutely certain we couldn't get it open. I climbed the rungs, my hands shaking. I pressed my shoulder hard against the cold steel plate. At first, it didn't budge. My stomach turned. I threw my entire weight into it, straining against the heavy metal until, finally, it began to yield. Using every ounce of leverage I had, I forced my body against the manhole cover, pushing it up rung by rung until it slammed open against the concrete above. M was up the ladder right behind me. We scrambled out into the night air, slammed the heavy hatch shut behind us, and ran. We didn't look back. We just ran as far and as fast as our legs could carry us, desperate to put distance between ourselves and the nightmare we had just lived through. We ended up spending the rest of the night at a friend's house, shaking as we recounted the insane experience to him. That night was the very last time either of us ever spoke about it out loud. The next day, I submitted an anonymous report to the police. To my knowledge, nothing was ever done, but the story doesn't quite end there. Recently, I was digging through local news archives to see if anything else had ever happened near that bridge. That's when I found something that chilled me to the bone. This exact tunnel had been posted about on this very forum 14 years ago. Neither of us had any idea. Looking through those original, decade-old posts, almost nothing had changed. The layout, the heavy hatch, the oppressive atmosphere, it was all identical. The only real differences? Back then, visitors reported finding standard trash-old tape, tobacco, and weed packets. They didn't find what we found. They didn't have to look at a blood-filled condom rotting in the dark, left behind by whatever monster now calls that tunnel home.